Welcome back into the Pig Trail Show, and welcome into, I don't know how you could get happier in terms of a Hog Hoops Report. We're about to take care of Kevin McPherson. I'm Jacob Morris. As always, that is Kevin McPherson. And Kevin, the Arkansas Razorbacks are Sweet 16 bound after a 0-5 start in the SEC. The worst start in SEC in program history, the worst start in conference play dating back to 85-86 in the Southwest Conference. This Arkansas team is headed to the Sweet 16, an unbelievable turnaround for this group. We will break down the game, but just in general, what are your impressions on what this team's accomplished up until this point?
Well, I think when you look back at these last, several weeks when they did start 0-5 and started to turn things around, they've won 7 of their last 9 games now. And they got their biggest win of the season, not just because it moved them to the Sweet 16, but it was a team that didn't even have 5 losses coming in, 31-4. And a 2 seed, and you look at the SEC teams that were 1 or 2 seeds, whether Arkansas was close, they got blown out at Tennessee, but they were close against Auburn, Florida, even Alabama, but they couldn't quite get over the hump. And you saw the quality of those higher level teams and how they finished games. And Arkansas finally solved that puzzle. I'm not saying St. John's is as good as Florida, Alabama, or Auburn, but it's a really good team out of a Big East that's no slouch. You need to I don't care what conference you're in. If you win 30 games in a season, you're a really good team. That means you didn't lose very many. So Arkansas is not only playing its best basketball right now, but we've seen now Arkansas suffer major attrition, push through that down to a 7 rotation. You get Boogie Flam back for these 2 games, 0 turnovers in 44 minutes. He's helped this team, and it hasn't ruffled your chemistry. It hasn't disrupted anything. You might get a Duthero back. John Calipari, that you're hearing it said a lot right now, is doing the best coaching job of his career, or one of his best coaching jobs. It's hard to argue that. This is vindication for him. But if you're an Arkansas Razorback fan, it's all roses because he's your head coach. He is the winningest, most successful first-year coach in Arkansas history. 22 wins and a Sweet 16 berth. No other first-year coach. And we're talking Hall of Famers in Eddie Sutton and Nolan Richardson. We know what Eric Patrick Musselman just did, with especially in the postseason. No first-year coach has ever done what this guy's done. Now, we know he's a Naismith Hall of Famer, but for all the naysayers, especially coming out of Big Blue Nation, everything right now, and I'm going to pat myself on the back. When I did my way too early preseason SEC power rankings back in September, I had Arkansas as 3rd in the league. Florida right behind it 4th. I had them a little higher than some of the other prognostications. I had Alabama and Auburn 1 and 2. I didn't have Auburn ahead of Alabama, but okay. And I had Tennessee at 5. So right now you've got 4 Final Four berths, and I just rattle off what my top 5 was, and 4 of those have already made it in. We'll see about Alabama later today, but Arkansas is proving what we thought this team would be. Preseason number 16. And if you make the Sweet 16, you're a top 16 team. So what we always saw in this roster build, what this coaching staff was capable of, what Arkansas as a program is capable of, the 4th Sweet 16 in the last 5 years, by the way, the 15th in school history, it's coming together now. Forget what happened getting here. It's coming together now when you want it to happen. And Arkansas is already doing better in this tournament now than teams that had better regular seasons, like in the SEC, for instance, like Missouri and Texas A&M. Arkansas has surpassed those teams at this point. And now that you've won that kind of game against that kind of opponent, I don't know, Jacob, that there's a team out there that Arkansas won't have a chance. Let's not forget Florida in this West bracket. Tough game to get day to day. It's hard to put out the 2-time defending UConn Huskies, but they did it by 2 points. Way back when Arkansas started 0-5 and had them at home, they lost that game, but they missed 15 free throws. It was a close game, and the defense showed up. They played well in that game. I think Florida coming into this tournament was the best team in the country. So I said all that to say I'm not sure there's an opponent out there that Arkansas, the way it's playing right now and solving and correcting its own, myriad of mistakes and miscues and self-inflicted wounds and stretches of implosion. They didn't have that against this St. John's team, which is the team you thought with the number 1 defense might be the team that could really capitalize on that. Arkansas never gave them those advantage. chances. Arkansas capitalized on those in both wins. Kansas too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting the fact that you mentioned all of a sudden it kind of feels like there might not be a team that, Arkansas can't hang with. And obviously, first the Hogs have to deal with Texas Tech, and we'll preview that matchup a little bit later. But, I think even if you just look at the spread in that game, it opened at about 5.5 points. So Texas Tech is favored, but by no stretch does after this performance does Vegas, does anybody think that it's a game that Arkansas can't compete in? And again, we'll preview Red Raiders and Hogs coming up in a little bit. But, you mentioned it a little bit there. I think the way that Arkansas won the St. John's game was what was also really impressive, just from the standpoint that, again, this is the Big East champs. This is a team that won 30-plus games, came in with 4 losses. And, a lot of people said this, but Arkansas looked more physical. They looked more athletic, and they just looked like the better team pretty much from start to finish. And, it made me think, you and I had a conversation 2-3 weeks ago where, you brought up, what's the best way for this team to win basketball games? Because we've seen them, shoot the lights out and play really well. We've seen them muck it up a little bit. And what was so impressive for me with this game was, Arkansas didn't shoot particularly well at all. They shot 2 of 19 from 3, but what they did was frustrate St. John's from start to finish with their defense. And I think the best example of that is R.J. Lewis, the Big East Player of the Year, 3 of 17. They have him so frustrated that Rick Pitino, a Hall of Famer, decides we're better off without him on the court for the final few minutes, right? And so Arkansas found a different way to win this game, and that's the sign of good coaching, and that's the sign of a good basketball team overall.
Yeah, and they also balled up Kadary Richmond.
Yeah.
They also Simeon Wilcher. I mean, you go through that backcourt, Aaron Scott. Other than Smith, who kind of turned it on in the second half and got some things going, their quicker, smaller guard. I think Carter Knox with his 4 blocks, Billy Richmond, we just sing their praises all the time, how good they are. They by far outplayed their 6'5", 6'6", 6'7" counterparts on the other side. And I thought they established that tone early.
Yeah.
This was the number 1 defense in the country. Arkansas, no slouch, top 20. Arkansas was the better defensive team. I mean, Arkansas shot 43% overall. They held St. John's to 28%.
Yeah.
We know it wasn't a good three-point shooting team anyway in St. John's, but I thought Arkansas's big guards and wings actually intimidated the names you just mentioned, the Big East Player of the Year, Kadary Richmond, who is a jack of all trades, kind of a stat sheet stuffer. Both of those guys, I mean, Richmond fouls out. They're Richmond, the Red Storm's Richmond, with only 5 points, 4 rebounds, and 2 assists. And what I noticed was, whether it was Carter Knox blocking shots or Billy Richmond staying in front or some of Arkansas's bigs being hard to score over, Arkansas altered shots, blocked shots early, and then even when those guys got clear driving, a little bit of daylight, they were altering their own shot attempts around the basket, anticipating a block, in trouble. And so they actually took themselves out of makeable shots by over adjusting. And both teams missed a lot of layups. We know Arkansas can be prone to that. The key here was so did St. John. So there wasn't really an advantage either team with some of the missed layups. And I thought Arkansas really got into their heads outside of Ejiofor, who had a monster game and does a great job of getting his arm hooked inside the defender's arm, raising it up. He doesn't lock down on it, so it's an obvious foul on him, but he creates the contact. He's the one that intertwines it to begin with, and then he exaggerates his reaction so he can draw fouls. And then defensively, he just bulldozes you.
Yeah.
No call. I thought that I really did. I thought St. John's benefited from the whistle in this game, especially in that second half.
Yeah, it turned into a bit of a ref show there where I think it was, I have the box score pulled up here, 44 total fouls, but, it felt like a couple of those whistles were questionable to say the least. You mentioned right there, sometimes it was like with him, I almost, when I looked at the box score and saw he drew 8 fouls, I was like, I almost felt like it was more with the amount of calls he was getting, right? But he was a load to deal with for Arkansas throughout the game. But, I think something that is just impressive about this Arkansas team is, you mentioned Billy Richmond there and how we've just seen him continue to progress throughout the season and just kind of embrace his role. And, he picked a heck of a time to have his, at least stat sheet wise, we know what he does effort wise every single game, but he picked a heck of a game to have stat sheet wise his best game in an Arkansas uniform. 16 points. Yeah. He grabs 9 rebounds as well. That was another one when I was perusing the box score. I was like, 9 rebounds? Really? He shows up every single game and gives 100% effort, but he was a major factor on the defensive side and the offensive side that Arkansas came out with a win yesterday.
Absolutely. So was Carter Knox.
Yeah.
Both of those guys, you see, Arkansas was +8 in the paint, but it wasn't always, you had Adu off the floor half the game, and he had, 2 buckets in the paint in the second half, didn't even have a field goal in the first half. But you had those guards, including DJ Wagner and Trevor Brazile, his 4 field goals were at the basket in the paint. So collectively, Arkansas was getting downhill, and the success it did have was driving the ball.
Yeah.
It wasn't a 3-point shooting game for Arkansas, 2 of 19. So It was getting in there. And it was Billy Richmond. I mean, he had an offensive rebound off a missed free throw and a putback off an 0-for-2 free throw trip by Trevor Brazile, which saved that possession. Billy Richmond just does all kinds of great stuff. And I love Carter Knox had a second half drive where he spun and had a reverse layup with going by Ejiofor. And then, Wagner had a back-to-back drives that he got buckets early in the second half, and Arkansas came into the second half with a 3-point lead, and they kind of grew it to 8 or 9 immediately.
Yeah.
And St. John's had to call a timeout before the under 16-minute. But Wagner put together 2 impressive finish drives, and then he and Billy Richmond with that baseline jumper late, and then Wagner after a steal by Boogie Flan, Wagner drives all the way in for a layup in the half court. You understand why Arkansas, even though it gave up 28 offensive rebounds to St. John's, why Arkansas was still +8 points in the paint, because they just continually attacked that rim. Took 12 threes in the first half, only 7 in the second half. They didn't bail out. They passed up open looks to drive. I thought that was smart. I thought it was smart, Jacob, because that's the only way you're going to have easier scores, and the only way you're going to generate free throw attempts and put pressure on the other team to foul you is by not settling for threes, attack that number 1 defense and put them on their heels.
Yeah. Carter Knox is a great example of that. When we've seen him at his best, it's been when he's been getting to the free throw line. I think it was either Georgia or Oklahoma, the game that it was similar where he found, I think it was Georgia, where he found 12, 13 points at the free throw line as well. And we know he can shoot. We know he's got a pretty jumper, but when he's aggressive, it completely changes the dynamic of Arkansas's offense. I keep saying it over and over again, but it was just the defensive performance that just, you talk about a team that St. John's looked like they were the underdog. They looked like they just were rattled from the beginning of the game. And, we've talked a lot. You can't always glean everything from assist numbers. Sometimes they can be misleading. But, St. John's finished the game. They're middle of the pack in terms of they're a top 50 team, averaged 16 assists per game. And they finished the game with 5 assists. It's just nothing came easy for that team throughout the entire game. And it just was such an impressive defensive performance from start to finish. Arkansas looked like they belonged, and they looked like they expected to win. And sometimes that's half the battle with this. Just the last kind of thing I'll ask you about here before we shift to previewing Texas Tech is, a topic of conversation coming into the game was people were very quick to note that St. John's is one of the best second-half teams in the entire country. They outscore teams by 8+ points in the second half. In the past 3, they've been outscoring opponents by 20+, and we know that Arkansas has had its fair share of second-half struggles. So, maybe it was the pessimist in me. I texted Evan this at halftime. I said, that was just a missed opportunity for Arkansas. They could have put their foot on the throat when St. John's had a stretch where they hit 1 field goal over 7 minutes in the middle of the first half. And I said, I don't know if they can overcome that. I know they had a great run to take the lead at the half, but that was their chance, man. They could have stretched that to double digits. But you talked about it. What did Arkansas do? But they came out and they punished St. John's right off the bat, made St. John's take a timeout. And I know it got close late, but Arkansas, with that run to start the second half and the run to end the first half, really put themselves in a position where they were in the driver's seat for the rest of the game. And I thought that their response against a team that has thrived in the second half the whole season was just beyond impressive.
Yeah, you're right. They were down 4. And they got, as unplayable as Big Z has been in this tournament for the most part, he had a nice stretch there at the end of the first half. He scored a bucket in that 7-0 run. Boogie Flan got a tough bucket, should have been an and one
Mm-hmm.
in there. I think Billy Richmond scored the first bucket in that run. Was it Richmond? But either
Yes.
way, Big Z got a couple of tough rebounds in there too. But you flip a 4-point deficit to a 3-point lead at halftime.
Massive.
And you're right. You felt like, hey, you might need a little, something going good for
Yeah.
you because of how good St. John's is in the second half. Then Arkansas comes out immediately and expands that lead. And that's when I felt like, okay, this is probably going down to the wire now. Arkansas is not going to just get handled in this half. And then Arkansas built it to 13. And that's when I started, that 11, 12-minute mark. And you're like, okay, how many times we've seen Arkansas build a double-digit lead? And then the implosion stretch comes where they just start lazy passes and fouling 3-point shooters and tipping the ball in for the other team. Or, it's like a three-ring circus with the calamities. It just didn't happen. It didn't happen. Arkansas, and I think a big part of that, I really think a big part of that is Boogie Flan's minutes. When he's on the court, they take better care of the basketball. Again, 44 minutes in 2 games, 0 turnovers. We talked about Carter Knox and his drive game, 9 of 11 at the free throw line, and we didn't mention that a minute ago. But Boogie Flan, to me, so when I look at him, I see a guy that the offense the ball moves a little bit better when he's in there, and it's protected better when he's in there. And we've seen DJ Wagner. I think one of the biggest stats yesterday. Yeah, he was only 4 of 16, but all 4 of those buckets were going to the basket, and he only took 2 3-point attempts. It tells me he wasn't settling and bailing out that St. John's defense. He was attacking, putting pressure on the paint, putting pressure on the rims. Now he didn't get a foul call. And that's wild because he drove in 14
Yeah.
times out of his 16 shot attempts. No contact, no foul calls. Come on, man. But I thought everybody played to their best and what their strengths are. And that's why I'm glad Boogie's back, is I think one of his strengths is it's a calming effect on that offense. There's fewer of those boneheaded turnovers. And we didn't talk about Nelly Davis. He had a fast start, 7 points in the first half, 6 in the second. He helped down that stretch where Adu was out a lot. He got a layup going, driving all the way in, made both free throws that he had late when St. John's had to stop the clock. I mean, you point around the team, Brazil with his 8 and 8, Adu and his limited minutes, 7 and 7, both of them had big box score plus minus that either matched or was better than the final margin. Nelly Davis, game high box score plus 15. Everybody in that game, you could say, well, Adu didn't have the kind of game he has been having. But in a low scoring game where the refs kept him on the bench, I thought he had a really good game
Yeah.
when he got his opportunities. I mean, he was impactful at both ends. In Brazil, he didn't hit 2 or 3 threes in this one. But man, he had 2 or 3 dunks, that
Yeah.
putback that was a goaltend at a crucial moment where Arkansas was struggling to find ways. It was just pointed around the dial. Everybody stood up, and now Texas Tech is a new challenge. And Arkansas has been the lower seed in both wins, 10 beating 7, 10 beating 2. Now it's 10 versus 3. I like Arkansas in this matchup. I do.
That's a little preview right there. Let's talk Red Raiders and Hogs. A little optimism right off the bat from you, Kevin. I think what stood out to me right away, now Arkansas, you move on, you take on Texas Tech. Like you said, it's another higher seed. And I think the conversation, it doesn't start and finish, but it certainly starts with JT Toppin when you talk about Texas Tech.
Yeah.
And, he's a Big 12 player of the year, 18 points per game. He's a 6'9" forward. He can stretch the floor. He's not super efficient, hits 30-some% from 3 as well. And he's the guy that Texas Tech plays through. And I think, Kevin, I don't know about you, but my first thought, it was about a 1-2 kind of situation. My first thought was, man, JT Toppin's going to be tough to deal with. All right. That was 1. And then the immediate 2 was, good gracious, it would be nice to have Adu Thero back to match up with him defensively, because those are guys that are very similar in terms of body type. It's 6'9" versus 6'8". And I'm not saying that you couldn't throw Trevin, that you couldn't throw Jonas, that it would be scary, but that you couldn't throw Big Z at Toppin, but it would be a little bit more of a matchup situation where I would worry about them on the perimeter against Toppin, where Adu Thero, it wouldn't be, I'm not saying Adu would go in there and shut him down, but it would be a much more point A, point B type of defensive matchup, and it would be really nice to have Adu back just in general, but for the Toppin matchup specifically, it would be a heck of a boost for the Razorbacks.
Yeah, I mean, you look around this tournament that Arkansas, the part that Arkansas's been in. You had Hunter Dickinson, an All-American.
Yeah.
You had a G4 who was a force, and now you've got, you mentioned it, Toppin. It starts with him. So I think, especially with Z and his struggles right now, playing with physicality, playing without fouling, being effective at both ends, you're really thin on that front line with
Mhm.
Adu and Brazil. And thank goodness they're playing their best basketball.
Yeah.
But it certainly wouldn't hurt to have a guy that's a little bit more versatile defensively
Yes.
with power and athleticism and some size, who can go out away from the basket and do some things a little differently. Get downhill from A to B on offense. Make the matchup, make the other guy defend and put him in some matchup issues. So you're right. Getting a Duke Thero back would be huge. Let's see if that happens.
Yeah.
If he's available and it's not a situation where you're just throwing him out there, but he can go. I mean, Boogie Fland is not at his peak,
Mhm.
but he's clearly able to help, and
Yeah.
he's not a liability out there. So that's what I'm talking about. If the guy can give you some of what works for him, I think it makes Arkansas even better. And it's also good to see proof of concept that bringing somebody back as well as the team was playing without him didn't actually hurt. It might have
Mhm.
helped. So maybe there's more of that in the mix if you get Thero back. I really like where you're going there because I think it would help.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think about, what Toppin did to Drake, for example. Drake is a small team and a great story and had a great season, but that was the big conversation going in was, how are they going to match up with Toppin, just from the standpoint that, I think it was they didn't have anybody over 6'10" on the roster, and that's not Arkansas's issue, but the point was they didn't really have a great matchup for Toppin, and he just had his way. It was 11 to 13, 25 points, 12 rebounds, and Texas Tech's a good team across the board, but that's where it's going to start and finish in terms of if he has his way, Arkansas is going to have a difficult kind of path. And that's a spot where Duke Thero, even if he's not 100%, just strictly on a body type standpoint and the way that he can move his feet would be a much better defensive matchup than throwing Z or Adu or Brazil at Toppin and hoping for the best for 40 minutes. You teased it a little bit there. I'm going to put you on the spot. Early on, you said you like Arkansas. If I ask you to make a prediction, are you taking the Hogs over the Red Raiders? And are you taking Arkansas to make the Elite Eight here in year one for Cal?
I am. I think
All
that's
right.
part of what's in the mix.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, Texas Tech obviously has had a great season.
Yeah.
We went through some of why. And so this is a team that it's not going to be a surprise if it beats Arkansas, right? I just think the stars are aligning right now. I think Arkansas's got at least one more win in them. We'll see what happens. We'll see how it plays out. I just think front court,
Yeah.
backcourt are playing really well together. And the one thing that they hadn't done all year against one of these top tier teams. I mean, Kentucky, as good as Kentucky is as a 3 seed, it's a team with double-digit losses. It's got a lot
Yeah.
of great wins, but it's got a lot of vulnerabilities and some injury issues there. So that's part of it. But Arkansas matched up really well there, and we know that was kind of a mid-season win to get things going. But these teams that are got a handful or 6 or 7 losses, Arkansas hasn't really been able to break through. So
Mm-hmm.
once they did against St. John's, now that tells me it's in their DNA that they can. It's never been about the personnel. They can match up talent, size, length,
Mm-hmm.
athleticism, and some parts of the skill. I think the other thing I like where Arkansas is doing right now, I really see like a guy like DJ Wagner, and now even with Boogie, they're doing a really good job in their opportunities when they're making reads on the defense and getting easy scores or close range scores or lob passes uh, for their bigs, for Adu and Brazil. And we saw that against St. John's. There were hardly any easy baskets for either team. Arkansas did win transition, so you got 11 points in transition. So in a game where there wasn't a whole lot of clean looks, that stood out. But I thought in the half court, Arkansas got some good looks just by the interaction between those guards and the bigs. And so I just look around, Knox and Richmond playing like
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they outplayed guys that had
Yeah.
all the headlines at their positions as freshmen. The Adu and Brazil effect lately. Brazil's playing his most consistent basketball of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just little bits and pieces. It's big performance stuff. I just look across the thing, and I don't see any reason why Arkansas can't put this third win together and move on to the Elite Eight.
There you have it. Elite Eight appearance from Kevin McPherson. Arkansas and Texas Tech matching up. I can't say I disagree with you. I'm going to go ahead right there and put my stamp on the Elite Eight prediction with you as well. I just think this team is playing confident, and this team came out and expected to beat St. John's, expected to beat the Big East champs, expected to beat a team coached by Rick Pitino. And I know it's a cliche. I know it can be overdone at some point, but that really is half the battle. This is a team that is the youngest group in the entire SEC, but they're playing confident and they're playing finally like the talent that we know that they have. But we shall see. Arkansas and Texas Tech in the Sweet 16. That feels crazy to even say after the season that we've had, Kevin. But the Hogs and Red Raiders for a chance to play in the Elite Eight. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. But that's going to do it for this week's Hog Hoops Report. That's Kevin McPherson. I'm Jacob Morris. More Picture Show coming up on the other side of the break.